Hello. Um, we're on to probably one of my least favorite works, but that's just my opinion. It is masterful. I just don't care for Gauguin. Number 123. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? So you might notice from the series of questions from the title that our artist is very interested in what the direction of humanity is. And here it's a fairly pessimistic view of the direction of humanity. I'm sure that you read in the article that I already asked you to read that this is addressing kind of the cycle of birth, life, and then death. We don't really see an indication of rebirth here, except in that the idea is that after people die, more people will come after them. Um, but we want to think about Gauguin as somebody who is wrestling with kind of the big questions of existence. Um, so this is a very large piece. I'll give you an image of it in context, but I think they said it was 5 feet tall. It's several feet. I think maybe like 12 feet in length, um, maybe a bit shorter. Okay, and what you also, I'm sure, read about in the Khan Academy article was the reference to primitivism. Now, we've mentioned primitivism before. I mentioned primitivism when we started looking at African masks, because as I think I told you then, um, modern artists, and we would consider Gauguin a modern artist, though not a modernist. There's a difference between those two things. Modern artists, many of them used works from what were considered to be primitive cultures as inspiration. And Gauguin obviously went far beyond just using works from those cultures for inspiration. He actually moved to Tahiti. He left his wife and kids when he did that. By the way, he had a bad run as he had been a relatively moderately successful painter. He was also a stockbroker. He lost his job in a stock market crash, and basically he booked it out of there and went to Tahiti. His mother was Peruvian, actually, and his father was French. He grew up in Peru for part of his young life, but lived most of his life in France. Anyway, so after he had this bad run of luck, job wise, he left. He left Paris, or he left France rather, and he went to Tahiti because he thought it was a simpler, purer way of life. When he got to Tahiti, he discovered that it had been colonized pretty extensively. It had been under French control for quite a while, and so he moved away from like the main city and into the countryside, and that's where he obviously gets the models for a number of his for this piece at least. So I'm going to lecture during the class about different styles in post impressionism. There's expressionism specifically, and then also symbolism. I would put Gauguin more in the symbolist mode rather than the expressionist mode. Some people think of him more as an expressionist, but I think for the purposes of this particular work, it's better to think of him as a symbolist. So he is a post-impressionist symbolist. So with symbolist painters or artists, there's an emphasis on the artist's ability to reveal truth through their subjective, through the expression of their subjective feelings. So it's about revealing a truth through my personal viewpoint and my personal mythology or way of looking at the world. The subject matter of a lot of symbolist paintings, and I have three here at the bottom here. This is Gustave Moreau. I like this one. This is Oh, was her name Bathsheba, the one who danced and got John the Baptist's head cut off, right? I think Bathsheba and the head of John the Baptist. I don't remember what this is called, but I think this is also by it's called Silence by Redon, I believe. Um, Symbolists tend to be interested in things that were considered maybe a little off. So occult ideas, the dream world. I'll talk a little bit. I've already mentioned Freud. I talked about Freud a long time ago at the beginning of the year when I talked about Merritt Oppenheim and Merritt Oppenheim's object and Freud and the the subconscious. So this is around that time, okay. So the interest in the dream world and what dream worlds reveal in terms of truth or identity is also a really important idea. And then finally, they're more interested. Symbolists are interested in like nuance and suggestions and being somewhat obscure. And certainly with this piece, that is the case. Let's see here. So I've already mentioned primitivism. He treated his painting, this particular work, as a philosophical meditation on the ultimate meaning of human existence. He was inspired in that question by his young life when he was a student at school. He went to a religious school, and there was a priest there who wrote his own kind of catechism, which means kind of teaching in spiritual matters, who brought up this question, where do we, that our purpose in life is to try to figure out what, these are good questions. Where do we come from? Where are we going? What are we? These are good questions to ask oneself. So that's the basis where Gauguin gets that idea. However, you want to remember that Gauguin is definitely anti-church, anti-clerical, as most or many artists of this time period in this area of the world were. Again, primitivism is that Western fascination with, with non-Western cultures because they're somehow understood to be purer, right? Because they haven't been corrupted. This is also from the I wish I could get this out of the way. It's very annoying. From the Khan Academy article, Gauguin wrote a letter to a friend and basically spelled out all the meanings of the different figures in the painting. He talks about the idol with its arms mysteriously raised, the old woman nearing death. We're meant to read the painting from right to left rather from left to right as we would normally read. So we start with the child, right, and we end with the old woman. And then, of course, the strange white bird holding a lizard in its claws represents the futility of words, says says Gauguin. And so this is what I mean by his own personal mythology, full of symbolism that may not be entirely clear to a reader, or excuse me, a viewer. I would point out in the middle, we have this large figure in the middle that kind of dominates the canvas, who is reaching up and picking up a piece of fruit. This should remind you, so it's a figure reaching up, picking out a piece of fruit. What should you think about? You should think about Eve, right? In picking the fruit from the tree of knowledge. So yes, this last line just gets me. So I have finished philosophical work on, you can't read it because I've messed this up. I finished a philosophical work on a theme comparable to that of the gospel. That's quite a claim. Anyway, we want to talk about the fact that the figures are in different proportions. They don't physically, they don't seem to be part of, this figure is much larger and out of proportion with this figure, right? That is by design. His intent was to suggest that they are not, they're kind of floating and they're not part of the earth, so they don't all go together in that way. the kind of the yellow tint to the skin stands out from the blue and green background. Um, he well, I'll get into that in a moment, I think. So he when he wrote this letter to this friend about painting this piece, he said that it came to him all at once and he did it without any sketches. That is not true. There's a sketch of it in the Louvre. So he was really very much interested in making sure that he was able to uh, promote a persona of him as an artist. Now, granted, he also did this piece or made this piece after a failed attempt at suicide. He had taken arsenic, and I guess he vomited too much, and it didn't take. So. Yeah, it's very dark. He's a friend of Van Gogh's. I like Van Gogh better than Gauguin personally. All right, so let's click here. All right, so the end of life, right? The bird with the lizard. Okay, the idol. All right. So again, highly personal mythology. The letters that he wrote to his friends about this piece suggests that, like I said, should be read from left to right. And the blue idol, he said, represents the beyond, quote unquote. And the woman who's close to death is accepting her fate with resignation. And so what we want to think about is that it's designed or it's painted to recall or to suggest frescoes, right? That, or long frescoes or long friezes or icons painted on a gold ground. So it does have also that kind of that flat aspect to it that we associate with early or medieval iconography. The upper corners have been painted with a bright yellow to contribute to that effect, to suggest that gold that we think about when we think about icons. And again, the figures are out of proportion to one another, as if they're floating in space rather than resting firmly on the earth. There is vivid use of color and thick brushstrokes. And he borrows that from the Impressionists, even though he's not an Impressionist. He is not an Impressionist. He's a post-Impressionist symbolist here. But rather than working very quickly like the Impressionists did, he would work very slowly. The canvas is very rough. I don't believe it was not pulled when he painted it. The three women with a child here, I'm going completely out of order, but the three women with a child represent the beginning of life. I've already mentioned the end of life. And the middle group is that daily existence of young adulthood. And that's what appears here. And I have an image of it in context too, so you can see how long it actually is. If you like this piece, that's wonderful. I just have a distaste for Gauguin personally, but that doesn't mean he's not great, right? I want you to remember Gauguin when we get to Fauvism, and Fauvism employs like really vivid, shocking, unusual, untraditional use of color, and so we can definitely see that here. There's a bit to the Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know if you guys know what Calvin and Hobbes is anymore. He was very popular when I was in college. Paul Gauguin once asked, whence do we come? What are we? Where are we going? Well, I don't know about anyone else, but I came from my room. I'm a kid with big plans, and I'm going outside. See you later. Who the heck is Paul Gauguin anyway, right? Okay, so that's it for this piece. I hope you also read the Khan Academy article. Thanks.